Mara O'Neill leaned over the ancient console, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the rusted interface. She had spent years hunting for this, the star map she'd uncovered in the deepest, forgotten archive of the Intergalactic Historical Society. The legend spoke of a lost generation, a group of genetically enhanced human soldiers, frozen in time after their victory against a galaxy-spanning enemy. But the truth was buried, lost in history's shadow. The dim glow of the console flickered to life. Mara's breath caught in her chest as the star map slowly appeared, a collection of coordinates stretching across an uncharted quadrant. For years, she had followed nothing but theories, ancient myths, and incomplete records. But now, in front of her, lay the answer. "Got it," she whispered to herself, her heart racing. The map wasn't just a relic. It was the key to unlocking humanity's forgotten legacy. The coordinates led to a distant, desolate world, uninhabited, hidden from the Empire's prying eyes. Mara had no doubt this was the place. Her mind raced, plotting her next steps. A forgotten military base, a cryogenic vault, whatever it was, she knew it held the answers. But Mara wasn't alone. A soft sound echoed in the corner of the archive room, footsteps muffled by the thick dust that filled the air. She froze, instinctively reaching for her sidearm. Her hand hovered near the grip, but she didn't draw it. There was no need. The intruders were too confident, too assured of their presence. From the shadows, two figures emerged, clad in black, their faces obscured by helmets. Mercenaries, no doubt. Mara had suspected her research would attract attention, but the timing couldn't have been worse. They had to have been watching her, waiting for her to make a discovery. "Don't," one of the mercenaries said, his voice muffled by his helmet. "We know what you found. Hand over the star map." Mara's eyes narrowed. These men didn't look like typical scavengers. They weren't here for the data, they were after something else. Perhaps they had been hired by someone, or worse, the Empire itself had caught wind of her research. She couldn't let them take it. "Get out of my way," she said, her voice steady, but her fingers itched for her weapon. The mercenary laughed, and in an instant, the two men flanked her, drawing weapons of their own, energy pistols, gleaming with deadly precision. Mara's heart pounded. She had no choice but to act fast. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the console and hurled it at the nearest mercenary. The impact sent him stumbling back, buying her just enough time to draw her blaster. She fired once, twice, the energy bolt hitting the second mercenary in the shoulder, sending him crashing into a pile of old crates. The first mercenary lunged at her, but Mara sidestepped, her training kicking in. She grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back and slamming him into the ground. The sound of his helmet cracking against the floor was satisfying, but she didn't stop to enjoy it. She grabbed the star map, tucked it into her bag, and ran for the exit. As she dashed through the dimly lit corridors, her mind raced. The mercenaries weren't working alone. Whoever was behind this would stop at nothing to find what she had uncovered. Mara didn't know who they were, but she knew one thing for sure. She had just uncovered a secret that would change everything, and there was no turning back now. Mara's pulse thudded in her ears as she sprinted through the maze of crumbling corridors, the echoes of her footsteps mingling with the muffled shouts of the mercenaries behind her. She didn't dare look back. The star map burned against her side, a tangible reminder of the stakes. She had to reach her ship to get to safety before whoever had hired the mercenaries tracked her down. As she reached the exterior of the archive, the overgrown landscape of the planet's surface spread out before her, a bleak, wind-swept horizon. Her ship, the Titan, a battered but reliable vessel, was parked just beyond the archway leading into the open field. But before she could reach it, a crackling voice interrupted her thoughts. "Stop!" a voice commanded, but it wasn't from the mercenaries. Mara froze, her heart skipping a beat. The voice was too calm, too commanding. She turned slowly, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. Standing in her path, silhouetted by the fading sun, was a tall figure, one that looked as if it had just stepped out of a nightmare. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette regal even in the dimming light. His face was hardened, his features sharp and calculating. But it was his eyes, familiar, almost unnervingly so, that drew her in. They were cold, like a predator's, yet there was a faint spark of humanity in them. He stepped forward, the sound of his boots slicing through the silence. "I'm Captain Aiden Drake," he said, his voice deep and steady, like he had been trained to command the galaxy itself. "And you are standing in the way of something far greater than yourself." Mara instinctively reached for her blaster, but before she could pull it from its holster, a voice from behind made her freeze. "Put it down, Mara," came another voice, softer, almost familiar. She spun to find a second figure, a woman this time, stepping into view. Her face was younger, but no less commanding, and she exuded a quiet strength. The woman smiled faintly, but it was tinged with sadness. "I'm Lieutenant Lyra Callahan. You're not in any danger, not if you come with us." Mara's mind raced. These were not ordinary people. Their presence radiated an air of authority, one that made her instinctively lower her weapon, despite every warning bell going off in her head. What are you?" Mara stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt the weight of the map in her bag, but her curiosity and the fear kept her from running. Drake glanced at his companion, who nodded subtly. The captain's expression softened for just a moment before it hardened again, the military precision returning to his demeanor. "We are the lost generation, Mara, soldiers of humanity's past and your future, the ones who fought to protect this galaxy before it was forgotten." The words struck Mara like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. The lost generation, the legends, the myths, now standing before her in the flesh. They weren't just stories or artifacts. They were real. She stood there stunned, her mind struggling to process the enormity of what she had just learned. But before she could speak, Drake continued, his gaze unwavering. "The galaxy is changing, and not in a way that favors humanity. The Empire, which you've probably heard whispers of, is more than just an occupying force. They're building something, a weapon capable of erasing all of us from existence. You found the key to stopping them, Mara." Mara's hands shook as she reached into her bag and pulled out the star map. "You know about this?" she asked, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Drake nodded solemnly. "We've been searching for this for centuries, but we've been asleep. Frozen, locked away in stasis, until now. You've awakened us, Mara, and now it's time to finish the job we started." He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "We need your help to find the Empire's weapon, to stop it before it's too late." Mara swallowed hard. She had come here seeking knowledge, answers to the mysteries of the lost generation. But what she had found was much larger than she could have ever imagined. These soldiers, these heroes, had been waiting, hidden away in time, for a reason. And now they were offering her a chance to change the fate of humanity. With a deep breath, Mara nodded. She had no choice but to follow them. This was no longer just an academic pursuit. It was a fight for survival. "Where do we start?" she asked, her voice steadying. Drake's lips curved into a grim smile. "We start by getting off this planet. The Empire will be coming for you, and they won't stop until they have what you found. It's time to awaken humanity's greatest heroes and remind the galaxy who we are." With that, they turned and began walking toward the Titan, ready for the battle that awaited them. The interior of the Titan was a patchwork of old and new, a testament to humanity's ingenuity in the face of desperate odds. Mara stepped aboard, her senses overwhelmed by the scent of worn leather and faint electrical hums from the ship's barely functional systems. It had seen better days, centuries of disuse had taken their toll. Yet, as Captain Drake and Lieutenant Callahan moved to the cockpit, there was a quiet confidence in their every movement. This was their home, their fortress. Mara's mind raced. She had barely processed the fact that she was standing on a ship with members of the Lost Generation, human soldiers from a time long past. What kind of force could they have been to be forgotten by the galaxy for so long? The universe had moved on. The once glorious empire that the Lost Generation fought against now reduced to a distant memory. So, what exactly happened? Mara asked, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence that had descended around her. You were frozen? All of you. Drake, who had been overseeing the repairs in the cockpit, glanced back at her. His expression was grave. The war was catastrophic. The Empire, back then, was a force of unimaginable power, led by alien species with technology far beyond our own. We fought, we won, but not without a cost. The decision was made to place us in stasis, to ensure that we wouldn't be needed unless the galaxy was again on the brink of collapse. We were meant to be humanity's last line of defense. And you were forgotten, Mara whispered, the weight of those words sinking in. For centuries. Callahan entered the conversation, her voice quiet but firm. The galaxy moved on. New alliances were formed, old enemies defeated. Humanity was scattered across the stars, fractured. No one remembered us, and no one wanted to. The Empire rebuilt, evolved, and became something even more dangerous than before. We had been erased from history. Until you found us, Drake added, his eyes narrowing as he looked out the viewport. And now, the universe's greatest mistake is about to catch up with us. Mara blinked, her mind struggling to catch up with the enormity of it all. What do you mean, catch up with you? I thought you said the Empire had been beaten. It's not that simple, Callan said, crossing her arms. The Empire you know of, the one you've heard of in stories, was only the tip of the iceberg. What we fought against was the beginning. The true danger lies in the technology they've been developing since our disappearance. They've created a new weapon, a device capable of wiping out entire planets, and it's nearing completion. Mara's blood ran cold. The superweapon. The very reason she had been drawn into this chaos in the first place. And you think I can help you stop it? You're more important than you realize, Drake said, turning back to face her. The star map you found is key to locating the weapon. But it's more than just a map. It's a code, a series of coordinates that will guide us to the heart of the Empire's secret project. We've been searching for this for centuries, but without the map, we never had a chance. Then why didn't you wake up sooner? Mara asked, her voice laced with frustration. Why wait until now? Why not stop it before? Callahan gave her a tired look. We were locked away. Our stasis pods were designed to keep us dormant until the need arose. But the galaxy's memory of us faded. And by the time we were activated, the Empire had already moved too far forward. Our enemies have grown stronger, more cunning. They're not the same Empire we once fought. Drake's gaze was sharp. That's why we need you, Mara. You're not just some historian. You've unlocked something that we couldn't have done on our own. Your knowledge of the galaxy's current state, the Empire's operations, it's invaluable. We need you to help us piece it all together. Mara's mind whirled. It wasn't just an academic pursuit anymore. It was a fight for survival. Her hands trembled slightly as she processed the gravity of the situation. She had been thrust into a war she never signed up for, a war that had been waiting for centuries to reawaken. The ship hummed to life as the engines roared, pulling Mara out of her thoughts. They were moving, leaving the barren planet behind, but Mara knew they weren't headed to safety. They were headed straight into the heart of the Empire, into the very danger they had spent centuries avoiding. There's no turning back now, Drake muttered, his tone resolute. We wake up, or we die trying. As the stars blurred into streaks of light outside the viewport, Mara's stomach tightened. She had no idea how they were going to win, but one thing was certain. She wasn't about to let humanity's heroes fade into dust again. Where are we headed? She asked. Drake turned to her, his expression unreadable. The Empire's capital. It's time to remind them who we are. And so the journey began. The stars outside the Titan streaked by in endless lines of light, the ship's engines pushing them further into the unknown. Mara sat in the galley, staring out at the vastness of space. Despite the growing sense of urgency around her, a part of her still couldn't fully comprehend what was happening. She had been thrust into a war she never expected, allied with soldiers who had been frozen in time for centuries. And now she was headed straight into the heart of the Empire's power. The ship was quiet, save for the hum of the engines and the occasional mutterings of Drake and Callahan as they discussed strategy. But even their normally unwavering focus seemed to be weighed down by the enormity of what was at stake. Mara couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. They were heading toward the Empire's capital, a place she knew was fortified beyond belief. If the Empire had been this secretive and advanced in the past, what were they now? And what had she really uncovered in the star map? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She turned to see Captain Drake and Lieutenant Callahan entering the galley, both looking more serious than usual. "We're approaching the first jump point," Drake said, his eyes hard, like they had been for hours. "We need to prepare. The Empire doesn't take kindly to intruders." Mara nodded, her stomach tightening. "You think they know we're coming?" "We can't be sure," Callahan replied, "but it's only a matter of time before they detect us. Our ship isn't exactly stealthy, and the Empire sensors are second to none. The only advantage we have is the element of surprise. For now." Mara stood, walking toward the small viewport that offered a clear view of the ship's course. The distant glow of a nearby planet loomed, and the jump point would take them to the heart of the Empire, a place few ever returned from. She felt the weight of the star map still tucked in her bag, hidden from their enemies, but now more important than ever. Drake's voice broke through her thoughts. "We've identified a resistance cell on the outskirts of the capital. They've been on the run for years, but they're still alive. They've managed to stay under the Empire's radar by hiding in the ruins of old human colonies. If anyone can help us, it's them." "A resistance?" Mara asked. "How large are they?" "Small," Callahan answered. "The Empire wiped out most of them, but there are pockets scattered throughout the galaxy. The one we're going to contact has been operating in the capital's shadow for the last decade. They have intel on the Empire's movements, and possibly more on the weapon we're looking for." Mara nodded slowly, the pieces starting to fall into place. The map she had uncovered was more than just a relic. It was a beacon, pointing them toward humanity's last hope. If the resistance was their best shot, they needed to succeed. There could be no missteps. "How do we contact them?" she asked. "Simple," Drake replied. "We'll make contact with an old ally of mine. If he's still alive, he'll help us. He's the last person I trust in the capital." Mara's heart raced. This wasn't just about finding the weapon anymore. This was about taking back the galaxy. They were going to fight, not just to stop the Empire, but to give humanity a chance to rebuild. As the jump point grew closer, the ship's interior vibrated slightly, a reminder of how fragile their escape plan really was. A silent warning hung in the air. The closer they got to the heart of the Empire, the more dangerous it became. "We've lost contact with the resistance," Callan said abruptly, her voice tense. "What do you mean, lost contact?" Mara asked, stepping closer. "They were supposed to meet us here," Drake said. "I don't like this. If something's happened, we're on our own, and the Empire will be coming for us in force." The realization hit Mara like a slap. They had trusted in this resistance to be their bridge into the capital, but now it looked like their only ally had vanished into thin air. And without them, they were stranded, one ship against the might of the Empire. "Do you have another plan?" she asked, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. Drake met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "We make our own path," he said, his voice cold with resolve. "We'll find a way. We always do." The silence stretched between them as the ship shot toward the jump point, the uncertainty of what awaited them hanging heavy in the air. Whatever lay ahead, Mara knew one thing for certain. The lost generation might be humanity's last line of defense, but they were about to face their greatest test yet. And with every passing moment, the stakes grew higher. The jump point loomed large ahead of the Titan, a swirling vortex of energy that would take them directly into the heart of the Empire. The ship's hull groaned as they approached, the faint hum of the engines vibrating beneath their feet. There was no turning back now. The jump would either succeed, or it would send them spiraling into unknown space, lost forever. Mara's eyes darted nervously between Captain Drake and Lieutenant Callahan, who stood near the cockpit, each seemingly lost in their own thoughts. Drake's jaw was set in a grim line, and Callahan's hands were tense on the controls, her focus unwavering. "We're about to make the jump," Callahan said quietly, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "Brace for impact," Drake added, his tone clipped, as if he was expecting the worst. "We'll be flying blind once we hit the other side. I don't trust the Empire's sensors, and we've already lost contact with the Resistance. We'll have to make it on our own from here." Mara felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had no choice but to trust them. There was nothing else to do. She turned back to the viewport, watching as the swirling blue of the jump point expanded, consuming the ship as they plunged into the unknown. For a moment, the ship shuddered violently, the hull creaking under the strain. Mara clenched her fists, bracing herself for whatever came next. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the turbulence ceased. The ship dropped out of the jump point with a harsh thud, the familiar stars of their destination stretching out before them. "Clear," Callahan said, her voice tinged with relief. Drake moved toward the communications console, fingers flying over the controls. He scowled as a series of alarms began blaring. "The Empire's already detected us. They've activated their planetary defenses," he muttered. Mara's heart dropped. "How long until they reach us?" "Minutes," Drake said, his expression hardening. "If we don't get to the surface quickly, we'll be blasted out of the sky." Callahan's fingers flew over the console as she worked furiously. "I'm rerouting the power to the shields. We can't take a direct hit, not with the ship in this condition." The ship jolted again, and a loud boom echoed through the hull. Mara's stomach lurched as the sound of laser fire rang out, the Empire's planetary defense systems targeting them with deadly precision. The Titan rocked with the impact, sending Mara tumbling into the wall before she could catch herself. "Get us to the surface," Drake shouted, his voice urgent. "Now." Callahan worked the controls with grim determination. "I'm trying to dodge their fire, but they're locking onto us. We'll need a miracle to make it out of this." Mara stumbled to her feet, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her shoulders. It wasn't just about stopping the weapon anymore. It was about survival. She had no idea what awaited them on the surface, whether the Resistance was still intact, or whether they'd find nothing but an Empire stronghold waiting to crush them. All she knew was that they couldn't afford to fail. "The landing zone's just ahead," Callahan said through gritted teeth, "but we're not going to make it without taking more fire." Drake's face was taut with concentration, but his voice was steady. "We'll make it. Hold on." Another explosion rattled the ship, and the entire structure groaned under the strain. Mara's heart raced, but she could see the ground below them now, a sprawling cityscape, half ruined, but clearly once a symbol of human achievement. It was a testament to everything that had been lost. "We're coming in hot," Callahan shouted. Mara barely had time to brace herself before the ship lurched downward, the nose of the Titan pointing toward the ruins of the city. A thunderous crash rocked the ship as it made a rough landing in the wreckage of a collapsed building. The impact sent Mara flying forward once more, but this time she managed to land on the floor, the force of the crash knocking the breath from her lungs. The ship shuddered to a halt. Silence. Mara blinked, slowly regaining her bearings. She could hear the faint whine of alarms, but it was the oppressive quiet of the city that now surrounded them that sent a chill down her spine. The Empire's defenses had failed to destroy them, at least for now. But the fact that they had survived meant they had already attracted attention. Drake's voice broke through the stillness. "We're here. Get ready. We're not alone." The door to the ship opened with a mechanical groan, revealing the ruins of a once thriving city. The streets were eerily empty, buildings reduced to rubble by years of conflict. And, in the distance, the ominous glow of Empire ships hovered in the sky, like vultures waiting to strike. Mara's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped out of the ship, the weight of the moment settling upon her. This was it. They had arrived. And now they would have to fight for humanity's survival one last time. Mara's boots hit the cracked pavement with a dull thud as she stepped out of the Titan, her breath catching in her throat. The city around them was a ghost of its former self, once a bustling center of humanity's pride, now reduced to ruins. The skeletal remains of tall buildings stretched toward the sky, their windows shattered and their facades pocked with scars from battles long past. The air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and ozone, and the occasional hum of distant Empire ships hovering above added to the unease in the atmosphere. "We need to move," Captain Drake urged, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. He stepped out of the ship, scanning their surroundings with a practiced eye. "The Empire won't take long to find us. We have to reach the Resistance's hideout before they do." Lieutenant Callahan was already ahead, her hands gripping a data pad, her gaze darting between the maps on the screen and the environment around them. "The Resistance's location is just a few clicks away," she said, her voice calm but tense. "We'll need to move fast, though. Their hideout is deep in the ruins, and it's only a matter of time before the Empire detects our landing." Mara nodded, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and fear wash over her. She had come so far, never imagining she would find herself here, on the war-torn streets of a forgotten world, in the company of soldiers who had fought battles she could only read about. And now she was a part of it. The weight of the star map pressed against her side, a constant reminder of the role she had to play in this fight. "We'll take the back alleys," Drake ordered, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed their route. "Stay close and keep quiet. We're too exposed out here." The team moved quickly, their footsteps muffled against the cracked concrete as they darted into the shadows of the nearest building. The silence of the city was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of metal or the distant sound of Empire patrols. Mara's heart raced, but she kept her focus on the path ahead. As they moved deeper into the ruins, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't just the Empire ships overhead, it was something else. A feeling that something, or someone, was lurking just beyond her line of sight. "I don't like this," Callahan muttered, stopping abruptly. She turned to face Drake, her brow furrowed. "This place feels wrong, too quiet." Drake's eyes narrowed. "We're too close. Stay alert." They continued forward, but the sense of unease only grew. The buildings around them were collapsing in on themselves, and the streets were littered with debris. Yet there was no sign of life, no movement, no sounds of resistance fighters ready to defend their last stronghold. "Something's not right," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt a sudden chill crawl up her spine. And then it happened. A loud explosion tore through the air, followed by a barrage of gunfire that rang out from multiple directions. The ground shook as debris rained down around them, and the team immediately hit the ground, taking cover behind the nearest wreckage. "They found us," Callahan shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. "Move." Drake's voice cut through the chaos. "Keep moving. We're almost there." The team sprinted through the wreckage, dodging the blaster fire that streaked past them. Mara's heart hammered in her chest as she darted between broken walls and rubble, trying to stay in line with the others. Her mind was racing. Who had set off the explosion? Was this the Resistance, or had the Empire already infiltrated the city? Up ahead, Drake yelled, pointing toward a half-collapsed building in the distance. The entrance is inside. Go. They pushed forward, their pace quickening as the sound of the Empire's forces grew louder. Mara felt a cold sweat on her brow as they reached the entrance to the building. But as they stepped inside, what greeted them was not the resistance they had hoped for. Instead, the place was in ruins, its walls shattered, its floors littered with debris. There were no signs of life, no resistance fighters, nothing but the remnants of what had once been a haven for those who opposed the Empire. "This can't be happening," Callahan whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "They were supposed to be here. They were our last hope." Drake's eyes scanned the room, his expression unreadable. "The Empire's already here. We've walked into a trap." Suddenly, a voice echoed from the shadows, cold and mocking. "You're not as clever as you think, Drake." A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, armored, with a helmet that obscured its face. The figure's voice had the chilling tone of someone who had seen it all, and relished the power it brought. "Mara, I'm sure you remember me," the figure said, stepping into the dim light. The voice was unmistakable. Mara's breath caught in her throat as the figure removed his helmet, revealing a face she hadn't seen in years, a face she never thought she would see again. "Commander Valen," she whispered in shock. The man who had once been a hero of the Empire, the man she had trusted, stood before her now as their greatest enemy. And the worst part was, he was holding the key to humanity's destruction. Mara's mind raced as she stood frozen in place, her eyes locked on Commander Valen. The figure who had once been a trusted ally, a mentor even, was now the enemy. His presence in the heart of the ruins, surrounded by the wreckage of their hopes, shattered everything she thought she knew. "Commander Valen?" Mara whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking his name would make this nightmare real. "What happened? You were supposed to be fighting for humanity." Valen's lips curled into a thin smile, though his eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth they once held. "Humanity? I was fighting for something far greater than mere survival, Mara. The Empire offers something that the fractured remnants of your rebellion could never hope to give." His voice was smooth, persuasive, as if he believed every word he said. "You're working with the Empire?" Mara's voice shook with disbelief. "After everything we went through, after everything you taught me?" "Everything you thought you knew," Valen corrected, his tone laced with condescension. "The Empire isn't the monster you think it is, Mara. It's the order that the galaxy needs. The chaos your resistance brings is what keeps humanity from moving forward." Drake stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. "We fought alongside you before, Valen. We trusted you. How could you betray everything we stood for?" Valen's gaze flickered to Drake and then back to Mara. "You misunderstand, Captain. This isn't betrayal. This is evolution." His helmet swung from his side, revealing more of the cold determination in his eyes. "Humanity's true place is with the Empire, under its rule, in the safety and stability it provides. You're too naive to see that, just like Mara was." Mara clenched her fists, her mind in turmoil. This couldn't be real. Valen, who had once taught her to fight for the greater good, who had once made her believe that the galaxy could be saved from tyranny, was now part of the very force that oppressed humanity. "You're wrong," she said, her voice firm now, though the sting of betrayal still burned deep. "You're not evolving, you're enslaving. The Empire only gives power to those who control, and we've seen what happens when they win." Valen's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. "And you will see the truth soon enough. The resistance was never going to win, Mara. The Empire's reach is far too great, and its power infinite. You think you can change the course of history with a few old soldiers and a scrap of a star map? How quaint." His eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. "But now you're in my hands, and I'll make sure this ends as it was always meant to. Your rebellion, your hope, it ends here." A flicker of movement caught Mara's eye. The faintest sound, a whisper almost, came from one of the ruined doorways. Without thinking, she lunged for her weapon. "Get down," she shouted, ducking behind cover. The blaster fire erupted almost immediately, a flurry of shots that rained down on their position, making the walls around them explode in a shower of debris. Mara's pulse pounded in her ears, adrenaline coursing through her as she scrambled for cover, the sound of weapons fire drowning out everything else. "Ambush!" Callahan shouted, returning fire as she crouched behind a shattered pillar. "They're not just with the Empire. Valen's leading an entire faction." Mara peered around the corner of the building and saw them. Soldiers in black armor, Empire insignia clearly visible. They were surrounding the building, moving in with deadly precision. "Move!" Drake barked, signaling for them to fall back deeper into the ruins. Mara couldn't take her eyes off Valen. He stood there, unfazed by the chaos around him, his expression impassive as he watched his soldiers close in. He hadn't even flinched when the blasters began to fire. It was as if he expected it all along. "You've always been too predictable, Drake," Valen called out, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "You still think this is a battle of good versus evil? How quaint." "We're fighting for freedom," Mara shot back, her voice steely despite the pounding in her chest. "And we won't stop until humanity is free of your Empire's chokehold." Valen shook his head, almost with pity. "You truly don't understand, do you, Mara? You never will. This is the future. The resistance was a failed idea, too much bloodshed, too many lives wasted. Now it's my turn to rewrite history." Before Mara could respond, Drake gave a sharp command, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Fall back. We need to regroup." Without waiting for another word, the team sprinted through the shattered corridors of the ruined building, firing back as they went. Valen's soldiers followed, relentless in their pursuit. The fight was not over, not yet, but every step Mara took felt heavier. She had just been forced to confront the worst kind of betrayal, one from someone she had once called a friend. And now, with Valen leading the charge for the Empire's ultimate weapon, the stakes had never been higher. It was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that the Resistance and humanity itself still had the strength to fight. Mara's resolve solidified, her anger burning hotter than ever. They had been betrayed, but they would not give up. Not now. Mara's legs burned as she sprinted through the crumbling corridors of the old Resistance hideout, the sharp sounds of blaster fire echoing in her ears. Her thoughts raced as she pushed herself harder, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Valen's betrayal had cut deeper than any blaster wound, and now, with the Empire closing in, their escape was the only thing that mattered. "Keep moving," Drake shouted, urging the group forward as they turned a corner, ducking into the next ruined building. Callahan was already at the entrance, her weapon trained on the perimeter, scanning for any signs of movement. "We've got a window," Callahan called out, her voice tight. "But it won't last long." Mara took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The city had gone silent again, an eerie stillness settling in after the chaos of their narrow escape. But it was a silence that only heightened her fear. The Empire was everywhere now. Valen had alerted them to their presence, and if they didn't find a way out soon, they would be trapped, surrounded on all sides. "Where's the extraction point?" Mara asked, her voice rough with exhaustion. "2 clicks from here, near the old spaceport," Drake replied, his eyes scanning the distance through the shattered windows. "We can make it, but we'll need a distraction." "What kind of distraction?" Callahan asked, raising an eyebrow, already knowing the answer. "We'll give them a taste of their own medicine," Drake said with a grim smile. "We'll use the last of the ordnance. They won't expect it." Mara nodded, though she knew that the plan came with risks. They only had a handful of explosive charges left, and once they used them, they would be out of options, but they had no choice. They couldn't fight their way through the Empire's forces, and their only hope now lay in getting to the extraction point. "Let's move," Drake ordered. The team hurried through the ruined streets, their path taking them deeper into the heart of the city. The distant hum of Empire ships grew louder as they neared the spaceport. Mara's pulse quickened with every step. It was a race against time. They had to get there before the Empire surrounded them completely. As they approached the outskirts of the spaceport, they could see the massive Empire blockade ships hovering overhead. Their sensors would have already locked onto the Titan's signature, and it wouldn't be long before they spotted the team on the ground. "Set the charges," Drake barked as he and Callahan took cover behind a large cargo crate. "We don't have much time." Mara glanced at the device in her hands. The explosive charges were powerful, but they had to be placed strategically, too close, and they take out their only chance at escaping. Too far, and they wouldn't cause enough of a distraction. "Stay low," she murmured, her fingers working quickly as she activated the charges and set them around the perimeter of the spaceport. The seconds felt like hours as she placed the last charge and signaled to the others. "Done." "On my mark," Drake said, his voice low but filled with urgency. 3, 2, 1. The explosion rocked the ground, sending a massive shockwave through the spaceport. The sky lit up as the charges detonated in a series of controlled blasts, sending Empire soldiers scrambling in confusion. For a moment, the entire blockade seemed to hesitate. "That should do it," Callahan said, her eyes gleaming with relief. "They won't be expecting another attack." Mara turned to the others, her heart pounding in her chest. "Now we run." They sprinted toward the awaiting extraction point, the sound of blaster fire intensifying behind them as the Empire recovered from the blast. The spaceport loomed ahead, and through the chaos, Mara could see the Titan, its engines flaring to life, ready for takeoff. But their victory was short-lived. A sharp cry rang out, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the ground. The Empire had anticipated their move. Valen's voice, cold and commanding, echoed across the open space. "Not so fast, Mara." The team turned in unison, finding Valen standing at the entrance to the spaceport, flanked by a dozen heavily armed Imperial soldiers. He was calm, almost eerily so, as if everything was going according to his plan. "You can't escape," Valen said, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "The Empire is already in control of this world, and you're nothing but remnants of a dying idea." Mara's hands tightened around her weapon. She had no intention of letting Valen have the last word. They had come too far, endured too much to be stopped now. "Get to the ship," Drake shouted, his voice urgent. "We fight," Callahan yelled, charging toward the enemy with her blaster raised. The last of their explosive charges detonated in the distance, taking out several of Valen's soldiers, but the remaining forces were still closing in. There was no way out now, no more tricks. The final confrontation had arrived. Mara's eyes locked with Valen's, and for a brief moment, she saw the man he once was, the man who had trained her, the man who had fought for humanity's future. But that man was gone. In his place stood someone who believed that the Empire's iron grip was the only path forward. "I don't care what you believe, Valen," Mara said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I fight for the future of humanity, and I won't stop until we win." The battle raged around them, blasters flashing and ships roaring to life. But in that moment, Mara knew that no matter how this fight ended, they had already won. Because they had not given in. They had not surrendered. And no matter what happened, they would never stop fighting for the freedom that humanity deserved.